The Dominion had ruled 300 star systems for 12,000 years. They had conquered worlds without number and crushed civilizations far older than their own. When their long-range sensors detected weak radio signals coming from a small blue planet in an ordinary solar system, Admiral Al felt only boredom. The signals were barely 100 years old. This civilization was a baby, still crawling in the cosmic nursery. Admiral Al stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, and watched the blue planet grow larger on his viewing screen. Earth, the inhabitants called it. Such a simple name for such a simple world. His fleet of 50 warships had crossed the void between stars to claim this world for the Dominion. It would be easy. It was always easy. Captain Daniel stood on the bridge of the United States starship Endeavour when the alien fleet appeared in the sky above Earth. One moment the space around the planet was empty. The next moment, 50 massive vessels hung in orbit like dark clouds waiting to storm. Daniel had served in the Navy for 15 years. He had seen combat. He had faced death, but nothing had prepared him for this. Lieutenant Laura Mitchell sat at her communications station with her fingers frozen above the controls. The signals coming from the alien ships were complex and strange, but the translation software was already working. Commander Park stood beside Daniel, his face pale but his voice steady as he ordered all defensive systems to full alert. Around the world, military forces scrambled to respond to the impossible sight in their sky. They broadcast their message to every communication device on the planet. Admiral Al appeared on billions of screens, his gray skin and black eyes a stark reminder that humanity was no longer alone. His voice was cold and without emotion as he delivered the words that had broken hundreds of worlds before this one. People of Earth, you have been chosen for incorporation into the Dominion. You will surrender your governments, your resources, and your freedom. Resistance is not possible. You have one planetary rotation to comply. If you refuse, your cities will burn and your species will serve us as slaves rather than citizens. This is your only warning. The message ended. Silence fell across the world. In homes and offices and military bases, humans stared at each other with fear in their eyes. Some wept. Some prayed. Some simply sat in stunned disbelief. The universe had just become a much larger and more terrifying place. In the United Nations headquarters in New York, Secretary General Maria Santos watched the alien message with calm eyes. She was 63 years old and had spent her life in diplomacy and politics. She had faced dictators and warlords and terrorists. She had negotiated peace in places where peace seemed impossible. And as she watched the alien admiral threaten her world, she felt something unexpected. She felt amused. Maria picked up the microphone that would broadcast her response to the alien fleet and to every nation on Earth. She took a slow breath and smiled the smile of someone who knew a secret that no one else could guess. Admiral Al of the Dominion, thank you for your offer. Earth respectfully declines. We suggest you return to your territory and forget you ever found this world. This is not a threat. This is advice. For your own safety, leave now. The response caused confusion on every ship. Admiral Al stared at his viewing screen with disbelief. In 12,000 years of conquest, no world had ever simply refused. Primitive species begged for mercy. Advanced civilizations tried to negotiate. But no one ever had treated the Dominion's ultimatum as a minor inconvenience. Admiral Al decided to teach these humans a lesson. He ordered his ships to activate their suppression field, a technology that disrupted electrical systems across an entire planet. This weapon had brought down civilizations with technology far beyond Earth's crude machines. Within seconds, the humans would lose all power, all communication, all ability to resist. The suppression field activated. Energy pulsed from 50 warships and washed over the blue planet below. Admiral Al waited for the lights of human cities to go dark. He waited for their primitive satellites to fall from orbit. He waited for panic and chaos to consume their world. Nothing happened. The cities continued to glow. The satellites continued to orbit. The human military continued to track the alien fleet with their weapons. The suppression field, which had never failed in 12,000 years, had simply stopped working. Admiral Al felt something he had not experienced in centuries. He felt fear. Deep beneath the Pentagon in Washington, General Cole sat in a room that did not appear on any official map. He was surrounded by screens showing the alien fleet and the failed attack. He was not surprised. He had been waiting for this moment his entire career, just as his father had waited, and his grandfather and countless generations before them. Picked up a phone that connected to no known network. He dialed a number that existed in no database. A voice answered, ancient and patient and somehow familiar. "They have arrived," said. "The suppression field failed just as you predicted." "Yes," the voice replied. "It was always going to fail. Their technology is based on principles we abandoned long ago, very long ago." "What do we do now?" There was a pause. Could hear something in the background, a sound like vast machines beginning to move after a long sleep. "Now," the voice said, "we remember who we are. Begin the awakening protocol. Open the archives in Antarctica, in Tibet, beneath the ocean. Let the old systems come back online. It is time for humanity to stop dreaming." Ended the call and entered a code into his terminal. Across the world, in places hidden from human knowledge for longer than human history, lights began to flicker on. Ancient doors began to open. Systems that had slumbered since before the ice ages began to hum with power. On the bridge of the Endeavour, Captain Daniel felt something strange. A memory that was not his own flickered at the edge of his mind. He saw stars being born. He saw galaxies spinning in the void. He saw himself, or someone who wore his face, standing on worlds that did not yet exist. He blinked and the vision faded, but something had changed. Something had awakened. Above Earth, Admiral Al watched his sensors with growing horror. Energy signatures were appearing across the planet, signatures so powerful that his instruments could barely measure them. These readings were impossible. This technology did not belong to a primitive species. This technology did not belong to any species the Dominion had ever encountered. This technology was old, older than the Dominion, older than the galaxy itself. And it was waking up. Beneath the ice of Antarctica, in chambers that had been sealed before humans learned to write, ancient machines began to stir. Lights that had been dark for 200,000 years flickered back to life. Power flowed through circuits made of materials that modern science could not name. And in the heart of this frozen tomb, a door opened for the first time since the last ice age began. Dr. Price had spent 20 years studying strange archaeological sites around the world. She had found structures in the Amazon that carbon dating placed at impossible ages. She had discovered metallic artifacts in African caves that should not have existed. She had written papers that her colleagues called fantasy and her enemies called fraud. Now, standing at the entrance to a facility that dwarfed anything humans had ever built, she finally understood that she had been right all along. The facility stretched for miles beneath the ice. Corridors of smooth white material branched in every direction, lit by a soft glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Machines of unknown purpose lined the walls, their designs elegant and alien and somehow deeply familiar. Walked forward in a daze, her breath forming clouds in the cold air, her mind struggling to accept what her eyes were seeing. She was not alone. Figures emerged from side passages, men and women dressed in simple gray clothing. They moved with calm purpose, checking systems and activating controls as if they had done this 1,000 times before. One of them, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes, approached with a gentle smile. "Welcome, Dr. Price," the woman said. "My name is Lane. We have been watching your work for many years. You came closer to the truth than anyone else in your generation. Now you will learn what that truth actually is." Above the ice, the fleet detected energy signatures erupting from locations across Earth. Admiral Al watched his tactical display with growing alarm as structures rose from the oceans, emerged from mountain ranges, and materialized in deserts. These were not the crude buildings of human civilization. These were something else entirely, something ancient, something powerful. "What is happening?" Admiral Al demanded. "Where is this technology coming from?" His science officers had no answers. The energy readings everything they knew about physics. The structures appearing on Earth used principles that science had never discovered, and the signals coming from these structures were not random. They were coordinated. They were communicating with each other in a language that predated the Dominion by millions of years. In Washington, Ambassador Foster was escorted to a helicopter by soldiers who would not answer his questions. He was the United States ambassador to the United Nations, a man who had dedicated his life to diplomacy and international relations. Now he found himself flying over mountains and forests to a destination that no one would reveal. The helicopter landed on a platform that had not existed 12 hours ago. It jutted from the side of Mount like a metal flower, smooth and silver, and covered in symbols that could not read but somehow understood. He was led through corridors of the same white material that Price was walking through on the other side of the world, and at the end of those corridors, he found Lane waiting for him. She explained everything. Humanity was not young. Humanity was old, older than any species currently sailing between the stars. Millions of years ago, when the galaxy was still young, humans had risen from a world not unlike modern Earth. They had developed technology beyond anything the current universe had seen. They had spread across the stars, seeding worlds with life, guiding the evolution of countless species, building an empire that spanned the entire galaxy. And then, after ages of existence, they had grown tired. "Imagine living for 1,000,000 years," said to as they walked through the ancient facility. "Imagine knowing everything, seeing everything, having no mysteries left to solve and no wonders left to discover. That is what happened to our ancestors. They became bored, they became weary, and so they made a choice. They chose to forget. They chose to sleep. They chose to lock away their technology, suppress their memories, and return to a primitive state on their original. They wanted to experience existence as new beings, to feel wonder again, to rediscover the universe with fresh eyes. They left behind keepers, volunteers who would maintain the old systems and guard the truth until the time came to awaken once more." The said, her voice soft with something like sadness. "They are one of our creations. We guided their evolution. We gave them intelligence. We watched them grow and spread across the stars. They do not know this. They believe they rose on their own. But they are our children, as are dozens of other species in this galaxy." Stood in silence, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Everything he had believed about human history, about human nature, about humanity's place in the universe, was wrong. Humans were not newcomers to the cosmic stage. Humans were the ones who had built the stage in the first place. "Why now?" he finally asked. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because they have forced our hand," replied. "We planned to sleep for another 1,000 years, perhaps 10,000. We wanted humanity to develop naturally, to rediscover space travel on their own terms, to earn their place among the stars. But the Dominion came too soon. They threatened our world, and so we must wake up before we are ready." Across the globe, the awakening continued. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, a city of crystal and light rose from where it had rested for eons. In the mountains of Tibet, temples that had seemed ancient now revealed their true nature as monitoring stations for a galactic network. In the jungles of South America, pyramids that archaeologists had attributed to lost civilizations opened their hidden chambers to reveal technology that explanation. And in the minds of certain humans, memories began to stir. Dreams of other lives, visions of other worlds. Knowledge that had been locked away for longer than recorded history was slowly, carefully beginning to return. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Al received a report that made his blood run cold. His historians had searched the oldest records of the Dominion, texts that predated their expansion, legends that most dismissed as mythology. In those ancient writings, they had found references to creators, to beings who had shaped the species in the distant past. The word used to describe these creators translated, roughly, as human. Admiral Al looked at the blue planet on his viewing screen. He had come here expecting to conquer a primitive species. Instead, he had found something far more terrifying. He had found his gods. And they were waking up. Adams was a nurse in Chicago. She had worked at the same hospital for 12 years, caring for the sick and the dying with steady hands and a gentle heart. She had never traveled beyond the borders of the United States. She had never dreamed of anything beyond her small apartment and her ordinary life. But on the night the aliens came, she began to remember things that could not possibly be real. She dreamed of standing on the bridge of a ship larger than cities. She dreamed of giving orders to fleets that numbered in the thousands. She dreamed of wars fought across distances so vast that light itself took centuries to cross them. And in those dreams, she was not Adams the nurse. She was Admiral of the First Expansion Fleet, commander of forces that had conquered galaxies. She woke up with tears on her face and knowledge in her mind that she could not explain. She knew how to calculate jump coordinates for faster-than-light travel. She knew the weak points in shield technology. She knew the location of weapons caches hidden on Earth for emergencies exactly like this one. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that these memories were real. Across the world, similar awakenings were happening. Was a construction worker in Dallas who suddenly remembered engineering planets into existence. Green was a teacher in Seattle who recalled debating philosophy with species that would not evolve for another million years. Benjamin Cole was a taxi driver in Boston who woke up knowing how to build a device that could tear holes in the fabric of space itself. The memories did not come all at once. They seeped in slowly, like water through cracks in a dam. Some people received only fragments, disconnected images and feelings that made no sense. Others received complete lifetimes, thousands of years of experience flooding into minds that had only known decades. The process was gentle for some and overwhelming for others. Professor Miller of MIT received more than most. He had spent his career studying theoretical physics, exploring ideas that his colleagues considered impossible. Now he understood why those ideas had always felt so natural to him. They were not theories. They were memories. He had helped develop this science hundreds of millions of years ago, in a laboratory orbiting a star that had long since burned out. Walked into the basement of his university building and found a door that had not existed yesterday. Behind that door was a chamber of smooth white material, identical to the facilities in Antarctica and Mount. In the center of the chamber sat a device that looked like a sphere of liquid silver. Approached it without fear. He knew this machine. He had built it in another life, in another age. He placed his hand on the sphere and felt it respond to his touch. Power flowed through circuits that had been dormant since before the dinosaurs walked the earth. The device activated and within hours had constructed a vessel capable of crossing the galaxy in moments. The knowledge came to him as naturally as breathing. He was not learning. He was remembering. Far above Earth, the High Council convened in emergency session aboard Admiral Al's flagship. The leaders of the Dominion had traveled across the stars to witness their fleet's easy conquest of a primitive world. Instead, they found themselves facing a crisis that threatened everything they believed. War Master Al was the first to speak. He was the supreme commander of all military forces, a warrior who had crushed rebellions and conquered empires. He did not believe in myths and legends. He believed in power, and he intended to use it. "These humans are playing tricks on us," Al declared. "They have found some ancient technology, some relic from a dead civilization, and they are using it to frighten us. We should destroy their planet before they can learn to use these weapons properly." "And if the legends are true," asked the oldest member of the council. What if these humans really are our creators? What if we are about to make war on our own gods? Then our gods have grown weak, Al replied. They hid their power. They forgot their own strength. They allowed themselves to become primitives scraping in the dirt of a single world. If they are truly the beings who created us, then they deserve to be conquered. The children have surpassed the parents. The debate raged for hours. Some council members called for immediate withdrawal, arguing that the Dominion should flee before the humans fully awakened. Others supported Al, believing that a swift and overwhelming attack could destroy the humans before they recovered their ancient power. Admiral Al listened to both sides and said nothing. He was watching his sensors, tracking the energy signatures that continued to grow across the human world. On Earth, the awakening accelerated. The Keepers emerged from their hidden facilities and began to coordinate with world governments. Lane addressed the United Nations, explaining what was happening and what it meant. Her words were broadcast to every nation, heard by billions of humans who were struggling to understand the new reality they found themselves in. You are not who you thought you were, told the world. You are not a young species taking its first steps into the universe. You are an ancient people who chose to forget, who chose to sleep, who chose to experience existence as innocent beings once more. That sleep is ending. The memories will return, slowly for some and quickly for others. Do not be afraid. You are simply waking up. Not everyone welcomed the news. Protests erupted in major cities as people rejected the idea that their entire history was a lie. Religious leaders struggled to reconcile these revelations with their faiths. Scientists demanded evidence, proof, explanations that fit within their understanding of the universe. The world was changing too fast, and many people wanted it to stop. But the awakening could not be stopped. It had been programmed into human DNA millions of years ago, a design to activate when the sleepers faced a threat they could not handle in their primitive state. The had triggered that. And now, whether they wanted to or not, humans were beginning to remember who they really were. Captain Daniel stood on the bridge of the Endeavor and felt the memories settling into his mind like old friends returning home. He remembered commanding ships during the first expansion. He remembered watching stars being born in stellar nurseries. He remembered the day the decision was made to sleep, to forget, to start again. He looked up at the fleet hanging in orbit above Earth, and he felt something he had not expected. He felt pity. These beings, these children of humanity, had no idea what they had awakened. They had come to conquer a primitive species. Instead, they had rung an alarm that echoed across time itself. The war fleet arrived 3 days after the first contact. 10,000 ships emerged from hyperspace in a formation that blotted out the stars. They carried weapons capable of burning continents to ash, bombs that could crack planets in half, soldiers bred for nothing but destruction. War Master Al stood on the bridge of his command ship and smiled. This would be the largest military operation in Dominion history, and it would be his greatest victory. He broadcast his intentions to the galaxy on every frequency that could reach. Let the other species watch, he thought. Let them see what happens to those who defy the Dominion. The humans had refused to surrender. The humans had embarrassed them with their tricks and their ancient technology. Now the humans would die, and their so-called elder status would be revealed as a pathetic lie. Commander Heather Davis watched the incoming fleet from the command center beneath Mount. She was 32 years old. She had served in the United States Navy for a decade. She had never commanded anything larger than a destroyer. But as the ancient memories continued to settle into her mind, she remembered commanding the First Fleet during the expansion era, over 400 million years ago. She remembered battles fought across distances that modern humans could not imagine. She remembered victories and defeats, and lessons learned over millions of years of warfare. She knew exactly how to defeat them, and she knew she could do it without killing a single one of them. The ancient defense grid activated fully for the first time since before the current universe had cooled. The planet Earth itself became a weapon, channeling energies that had been stored in its core for eons beyond counting. Ships that had slumbered in pockets of folded space materialized around the planet in perfect formation. These vessels were so old they had been constructed when the galaxy was still forming, when the stars themselves were young and bright and new. The human fleet numbered only 50 ships against the 10,000. But these 50 ships were relics of an age when humanity had commanded forces that spanned the observable universe. Each one carried weapons that made the arsenal look like children's toys. Each one was crewed by awakened humans whose memories stretched back millions of years. War Master Al gave the order to attack. 10,000 ships opened fire simultaneously. Beams of energy that could vaporize moons lanced toward the human fleet. Missiles carrying antimatter warheads streaked through space. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to fractions of the speed of light. It was enough firepower to destroy 100 worlds. The human ships did not move. They did not need to. Shields flickered into existence around the human fleet, shields that operated on principles they had never discovered. The energy beams bent around these shields like water flowing around stones. The missiles detonated harmlessly against barriers they could not penetrate. The kinetic projectiles simply stopped in mid-flight, their momentum absorbed by fields that conventional physics. "Return fire," Heather commanded, her voice calm and steady. But the human weapons did not destroy. They disabled. Pulses of carefully calibrated energy swept through the fleet, shutting down engines and weapons and shields without damaging the ships themselves. One by one, the 10,000 vessels of the Dominion's war fleet went dark, their crews alive but helpless. The battle lasted less than 1 minute. War Master Al stood frozen on his bridge as the lights died around him. Emergency power flickered on, casting red shadows across the faces of his terrified crew. His weapons were dead. His engines were dead. His communications were dead. 10,000 ships, the greatest military force the Dominion had ever assembled, had been neutralized in the time it took to draw a breath. Admiral Al found himself alone in a white room with no visible walls. He had been standing on his command deck one moment, and now he was here, transported by technology he could not comprehend. A figure stood before him, a human male with dark hair and kind eyes. It took Al a moment to recognize him as Captain Daniel, the commander of the first human ship he had encountered. But there was something different about Daniel now. His eyes held a depth that spoke of ages beyond counting. His presence filled the room like gravity, like the weight of centuries pressing down from above. This was not the primitive Captain Al had dismissed with contempt. This was something far older, something far more powerful. "You were created with purpose," Daniel said gently, "to explore, to grow, to find your own path among the stars. We guided your evolution millions of years ago. We watched you develop from primitive creatures into a spacefaring civilization. We were proud of what you became." Al could not speak. His throat had closed with fear and awe and something that might have been shame. "We did not intend for you to become conquerors," Daniel continued. "We did not design you to dominate and destroy. Somewhere along your path, you lost your way. You forgot the curiosity that once drove you. You forgot the compassion that once defined you. You became something we never wanted you to be." "What happens now?" Al managed to whisper. Daniel smiled, and in that smile was sadness and hope and love. It was the smile of a parent looking at a child who had made terrible mistakes but still deserved a chance to grow. "Now you learn the truth about yourselves. Now you see the records we have kept, the history you have forgotten, the story of your own creation. And then you decide what kind of people you want to become. You can continue down the path of conquest and domination, or you can remember who you were meant to be." "And if we choose conquest?" Al asked. "Then we will stop you," Daniel replied simply. "We do not wish to destroy our children, but we will not allow them to destroy others. The choice is yours. It has always been yours. We simply hope you choose wisely." The white room faded, and Al found himself back on his darkened bridge. Around him, his crew stared at their useless consoles with expressions of shock and fear. But Al was no longer thinking about the battle they had lost. He was thinking about the truth he had learned. He was thinking about the choice he would have to make. Outside, the human fleet held position around Earth, patient and watchful. They had demonstrated their power. Now they would wait to see how their children would respond. And across the galaxy, other species watched the confrontation with growing wonder. The humans were real. The creators had returned. The universe would never be the same. 6 months had passed since the fleet went dark above Earth. In that time, the galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Dominion, which had ruled 300 star systems with an iron fist, had dissolved almost overnight. When the truth of their origins spread through their civilization, the foundations of their society crumbled. How could they claim superiority over other species when they themselves were merely the creations of another? Admiral Al had been the first to accept the new reality. He had stood before the High Council and told them what he had learned in that white room. He had shown them the records the humans had provided, evidence of their creation that could not be. And he had asked the question that would define his people for generations to come. What kind of species did they want to be? War Master Al had refused to accept the truth. He had gathered a faction of loyal followers and fled to the outer reaches of space, vowing to continue the fight against human tyranny. But his fleet was small, his resources were limited, and one by one his allies abandoned him. The last report said he was hiding on a dead world at the edge of the galaxy, raging at stars that no longer listened. The rest of them chose a different path. They replaced the Dominion with a loose confederation of worlds, each free to govern itself as it saw fit. They reached out to the species they had conquered and offered reparations for centuries of oppression. It would take generations to heal the wounds they had caused, but for the first time in 12,000 years, they were trying. Ambassador Foster served as humanity's voice in the new Galactic Council. He spent his days mediating disputes between species that had been enemies for. It was exhausting work, frustrating and often thankless. But when he saw former adversaries sitting at the same table, working toward common goals, he knew that something miraculous was happening. The galaxy was learning to cooperate, and humanity was helping to guide the way. On Earth, the integration of ancient and modern humanity continued. Dr. Price led teams of archaeologists and keepers as they documented the facilities that had been hidden around the globe. Each discovery revealed more about what humanity had once been. They found libraries containing the history of 1,000,000 worlds. They found laboratories where stars had been designed and planets had been shaped. They found archives holding the memories of beings who had lived for millions of years. And they found letters, personal messages left by the sleepers before they chose to forget, explaining why they had made their choice. "We have seen everything," one message read. "We have done everything. We have lived so long that existence itself has become routine. The only gift left to give ourselves is the gift of forgetting, the chance to experience wonder once more. We will sleep, and when we wake, the universe will be new again." Not everyone welcomed the changes. Protests continued in cities around the world as people struggled to accept that their entire history was a deliberate forgetting. Some demanded that the awakening be reversed, that humanity return to its innocent state. Others embraced the new knowledge too eagerly, treating the ancient technology as toys rather than responsibilities. Finding balance between the old and the new was the greatest challenge humanity faced. Benjamin Cole, the former taxi driver who now remembered lifetimes as a philosopher, became the voice of those who questioned the awakening. He wrote essays and gave speeches asking whether returning to their ancient state was truly a blessing. They had chosen to forget for a reason, he argued. Perhaps that choice deserved respect. Perhaps innocence had value that power could never replace. Lane listened to these arguments with understanding. She had been a keeper for 800 years, watching over humanity's sleeping heritage. She had seen generations live and die without knowing the truth, and she agreed that something precious was lost when the awakening began. "You are right to question," she told Benjamin during one of their many conversations. "We did not hide our past from you to deceive. We did so because innocence has value. Wonder has value. The joy of discovery cannot exist if you already know all the answers. The awakening was forced upon us by circumstances beyond our control, but that does not mean we should abandon everything we learned during our long sleep." Commander Heather Davis stood at the helm of the Endeavour as it prepared for humanity's first official voyage back to the stars. The ship had been rebuilt with a blend of ancient and modern technology, a symbol of the new humanity that was emerging from the ashes of the old. Her crew was a mix of awakened and ordinary humans, working together seamlessly despite their different perspectives. Their mission was simple. They would visit the worlds humanity had seeded millions of years ago. They would see what their children had become. They would begin the long process of reunion that would take centuries to complete. And they would learn, perhaps, whether the choice to sleep had been wisdom or mistake. In a small apartment in Boston, retired teacher Grace Parker watched the launch on her television. She was 84 years old and had never traveled beyond Massachusetts. She had lived a quiet life, teaching children, raising a family, growing old in the same neighborhood where she had been born. But as the Endeavour disappeared into the stars, she felt something stir in her mind. Memories, ancient memories, lives lived before she was born, adventures experienced before Earth had cooled from its molten birth. They rose like bubbles from deep water, slowly at first, then faster and faster. She saw herself standing on the bridges of ships. She saw herself walking on worlds beneath alien suns. She saw herself making the choice to forget, to sleep, to start again. She smiled. The memories did not frighten her. They felt like coming home. She picked up her phone and called her granddaughter. The young woman answered on the second ring, her voice bright with curiosity. "Grandma, are you watching the launch?" "I am," Grace replied. "I think I have a story to tell you. Many stories, actually. Would you like to hear them?" "Of course," said. And so Grace began to speak. She told of the early days when humanity first reached for the stars. She told of the great expansion when they spread across the galaxy like seeds on the wind. She told of the weariness that eventually came and the choice they made to sleep. And she told of the hope that now filled her heart, the belief that this time things might be different. Above Earth, in chambers that had not been opened in ages beyond counting, the Founder's archive powered fully online. Every memory, every record, every fragment of humanity's vast history was now accessible to those who wished to learn. The sleepers were awake. The children had returned, and the universe was about to discover what that truly meant. In the dark between stars, the Endeavour sailed onward, carrying the hopes of two civilizations. Behind them, Earth glowed blue and green and alive. Ahead of them, the galaxy waited, full of wonders they had created and then forgotten. It was time to remember. It was time to begin again. And now the sleepers were rising.